Welcome to the Hello Sunday podcast with me, Nikki Hayden. This is the podcast that discusses everything self-development, spirituality and sobriety. And it wouldn't be me without a little sprinkling of humour. Whether you are just starting out on your journey of self-development or have been exploring these topics for years, are completely alcohol-free or just curious about living a more sober lifestyle, this is the podcast for you. Each week, I'll be exploring topics in both solo episodes and with some amazing guest experts. So if you like what you hear, then please subscribe, rate and review. So with that said, let's dive into today's episode. Hello, welcome back to another episode of Hello Sunday. How are you all doing? I hope you've had a really, really good week. My week has led to the topic of today's podcast. Sometimes doing this podcast, I'll get, like bolts of inspiration through the week, or I'll read a quote, or one of you guys might message me and ask me to talk about something. But the last couple of weeks have been basically my own therapy, guys. I'm not going to lie. It's a lot of the things that I need to hear at the moment. And also things that it's not just now that I need to hear them, but a constant reminder, last week how to, sit with, identify, process negative emotions. The week before that was a bit of a download and a bit of a offloading of just my week and how I'd been feeling. And this week, despite feeling tons better, there's a lot of trusting the process that I'm having to do at the moment. There's a lot of keeping the faith, reminding myself of why we're doing this, and being bloody patient. So I thought, if I'm going through this at the moment and I'm experiencing this, then there's got to be tons of other people that are going through the same thing. And even if you're not now, this is one of those episodes that you can come back to in the future when you are experiencing a period of just like, what the fuck is going on, and how on earth am I meant to just keep the faith and trust whatever that situation might be. I know that I will listen back to it. So as cringy as it might be to listen to my own voice, I do listen back to all these episodes when I'm editing. And sometimes just to remind me of just, the things that I already know, the things that are already knowledge inside me that I sometimes forget. So that's what we're going to be chatting about today. But yeah, I hope you've all had a great week. It seems like we're on the cusp, aren't we? Don't know what it's like in other countries at the moment, but in the UK, we have been teased with a bit of sunshine, and then it's been really heavy rain, and now it's just kind of been a bit like grey, drizzly. We're not quite there yet, are we? But we are getting there. We have to trust the process. We have to trust that things are coming, things are happening, and that the sunshine and the nice weather is on the way. But I must admit, those days where we've just had things a little bit nicer and everybody's just that little bit happier, got a little spring in their step, it's coming. So I think next week's episode is going to be all around refocusing and revisioning for the spring equinox, and just talking about, some of the cyclical stuff that I've learned about over the last year, about kind of like energies and just working with our energies and refocusing for the spring and the summer months. So really, really excited to record that one. But yeah, today, as I said, we're going to be talking about trusting the process. So what do I mean by trusting the process? I guess for me, it's about knowing that when there's something that you want, or when there's something that you're working towards, things will always work out in the end. Now, it might not necessarily be that the thing that you wanted or that you're working towards actually do end up go in the way that you expected them to, or working out as you wanted it to. But be it success or be it a life lesson, you will always get something from every situation. And I think for me, that has been a really, really big lesson. Probably the biggest lesson that I've taken, other than being kind of in alignment and all of the stuff around energy work, which again, I'm probably going to do a few more episodes on in the coming weeks and months. But other than kind of magnetism, alignment and energy, and I guess that kind of ties in with trusting the process somewhat, because you have to focus your energy and focus on being in a high vibe, and actually patience and trust all play into that. But for me, this has probably been the biggest lesson over the last 10 years. And I say the last 10 years because whilst I was kind of aware of some of this self-development work, and I guess had sort of dipped my toe in previously, it wasn't until I had an absolute bolt out of the blue, what felt like a big middle finger from the universe, when my first marriage broke down, that it really made me sit up and take note and look at what I was doing to influence the outcomes of my life and how things were playing out for me. So for me, trusting the process is just knowing that things are going to work out. They just might not work out exactly as you anticipated, but actually you'll always get something from it. And that isn't the same as, I guess, putting a positive spin on every situation. I think, going back to last week's episode, we're not talking about, oh, it'll all work out fine, or, oh, don't worry if you don't get it, it's all a lesson. It kind of is that, but I guess we have to really understand how to be aware of and process those lessons, and not just try and put a positive spin on absolutely everything, because sometimes you just don't feel like that. Like, if you're, I don't know, going for a house and it's your dream house and that process doesn't work out in your favour and it falls through, in that moment, telling yourself, oh, it's fine, something better will come, it's really fucking hard. And actually, as I said last week, you need to acknowledge how you feel and process that before you can move on to the next stage of taking the lessons and putting your trust back into that process. So if you haven't listened to last week's episode, put my teeth back in, can't get my words out. If you haven't listened to last week's episode about identifying and understanding your emotions and processing them, then I would probably listen to that one maybe after this, or even before, just so that you know what I'm talking about. So there's probably going to be quite a lot of personal stories listed into today's episode. Probably going to be a bit of oversharing, I'm not going to lie, but hey, we're all friends here. But I've had quite a few big life lessons, I guess kind of situations over the last few years where I've looked back and gone, okay, now I know why that happened. Now I know why at the time things felt like they were falling apart. But actually in hindsight and with the ability to look back, in retrospect, they weren't falling apart at all. They were, but it was so that something better could fall together, could come together. And at the time, if somebody would have told me that, I'd have probably wanted to smack them. When you find out that your husband has cheated, or you get fired from a job, or you don't get the house that you want, somebody telling you it all happens for a reason in that moment is probably the most fucking frustrating thing that you can experience. But actually, when you look back, I'd say 9 times out of 10, well, for me, 10 times out of 10, I've always understood why things have happened the way that they have. And that's then really reassuring to make me trust the process the next time that something feels really sticky or really tough. And actually right now, and the reason that I say that it's really prevalent for me at the moment and really poignant at the moment, is because actually I think I mentioned maybe an episode or two ago, an amazing first year in my business. This year has been a lot tougher. There's probably a few reasons for that, but so far this reason has been a lot tougher, that this year has been a lot tougher. And even though I know the reasons for that, it's still really, really difficult to make yourself feel positively and trust the process when you're in it. When you're in it, your mind goes 100 miles an hour, all the negative scenarios and things that could happen. But I know that coming out of the other side of this year, I will have had some invaluable business lessons that actually the first year of business couldn't have taught me, because everything just went so amazingly. So at the minute, I'm having to trust the process when it comes to a lot of work stuff. But in the past, it's been much bigger or much more life-changing stuff. So as I say, you know, my first marriage breaking down, that was an absolute bolt out of the blue. It was completely out of my control in terms of the, you know, what happened. And once that trust was broken, there wasn't really any going back. Following my marriage breakdown, I then subsequently, a couple of years later, met a new partner. He was Dutch. And my landlord of the flat that I was in at the time decided to sell the flat. And at that point in time, I had two choices. I could either put in an offer to buy it, which I didn't really have the funds for. I'm sure I could have found a way. Or I took that as a sign that actually it was time to take a risk and make a really big life change. And so I packed up everything that I owned, sold my car, and moved to Holland. Whilst at the time that felt like a really risky move, I'd also got a safety net. I had got some money saved. I knew that if I needed to come back to the job that I'd left, that there was a high chance that they would take me back, because I'd left on really good terms, and I'd worked there for a long time. I'd worked there for like 6 years before I left. So whilst it was a risk, it wasn't one that didn't have a fallback plan. And actually, as it transpired, I needed to use that fallback plan because things didn't work out. And at the time when things didn't work out and I was in a foreign country, I was experiencing all of the culture shock, and it was just really tough, you know, in a country where I didn't speak the language, albeit the Dutch are phenomenal and spoke English to me, you know, all the time. It was really tough. And then when that didn't work out, it was hard to not see that everything had just fallen apart and that was the end of my plans and my future, which obviously was not the case. I came back to the UK, went back to the business that I'd worked for before, but actually the skill set that I'd built in Holland of launching a new business unit and seeing it done by a big multinational corporate that I'd worked for over in the Netherlands, you know, all the processes and all that sort of stuff, that had actually given me the skill set to be able to come back to the UK and do that for the business that I'd left. So actually looking back, was the relationship hadn't worked, and, you know, I hadn't been entirely happy in the 5 or 6 months that I was over in Holland. It had equipped me with something else that at the time I couldn't see, because I was so deep in the grief of the loss of the relationship and of the future that I thought I was going to have, and in feeling like I'd failed. But actually, you know, it wasn't the case at all. I needed to have that learning and that lesson and go through that process to tool me up with the skills that I needed for when I came back to the UK. But obviously at the time, you don't necessarily see it like that. But there is a real faith that has to come into this whole concept of trusting the process. I think having evidence where you look back and say, at the time I didn't know it, but everything was always working out. And there isn't one single situation that I have gone through in my life where actually in hindsight and looking back, it was, as one of my friends and mentors, Gina, would say, following the cosmic breadcrumbs. So the cosmic breadcrumbs are those little pieces of learnings, or the situations, the things that snowball that we go through that lead us to an outcome. And your whole life is a series of cosmic breadcrumbs. It's just that we can't see it. We can't see where these things are leading us, and we can't see the next step. But it's about that trust and about that faith. And it's about knowing that there is a larger plan at work. So with the law of attraction and with manifestation, we talk a lot about, trusting and surrendering and putting out our intention or our desire to the universe, and then trusting and surrendering and knowing that we can't control the how, but that whatever is for our highest good will unravel and will come to fruition. And that isn't always what you want. So it might be that the house that you were bidding on or put an offer in fell through, and at the time you feel like, that's it, we're never going to have our dream home. And how many times, and actually I saw my mortgage advisor, Becky, post about this week, and she said the amount of times that people have sobbed to me that their house has fallen through and that they're never going to find a house to move to, and then actually the next home that they found has been even better than the one that fell through. And I'm using the house scenario as an example because that is something that has, fairly recently, only 3 years ago, happened to us, and a process that me and my husband went through. It was a very, very challenging process because of our financial situation at the time and trying to get a mortgage, and then the company that we went through to get the mortgage being less than ideal in terms of their customer service and their processes. And trusting that process felt like we were going mad at times, but it all worked out in the end. And I'm sat recording this from the beautiful home that we wanted to. For those of you that are regular listeners to the show, or maybe you know me personally, you won't have been able to get away without hearing me talk about Simprove. Simprove is a scientifically backed, water-based probiotic drink. You drink it daily, and it has been scientifically proven to help with things like bloating, IBS symptoms, pain. It was actually a dietitian friend of mine that introduced it to me last year, and I honestly wouldn't be without it now. It's helped with my energy, with my bloating, it's helped with my immune system, and also things like my skin. The list is honestly endless. Now, I have got a code for you. So if you'd like to try Simprove, you can get 50%, that's a massive 50% off your first 3 month subscription by going on to simprove.com and putting in the code Nikki50. That's NIKKI 50, or clicking the link in the show notes. That we put an offer in and that we wanted to manifest. And I actually used to drive past this house. I had PT sessions just down the road, and I used to come and drive past this house and just sit outside and imagine us living here. And I used to just trust that that would happen. And I had a picture of it on my vision board, and all of the stuff and all of the things that meant that I just had a deep knowing that that was going to happen. I just had a deep knowing that it was going to be ours. And we had to trust in every single fuck up and every single time that we were put to the back of the queue, or we were told that they were going to put the house back on the market. We just had to trust that that was going to work out. And you know what? If it hadn't have done, then that wasn't for us. And that is the faith part of that you have to put in. So I've got a couple of examples from my friendship group. I'm not going to name names, but I'm sure that they won't mind me. Well, I know that one of them definitely won't mind me mentioning their journey, because I've already said that this is something that I would like to have done in this episode. So one of my friends recently moved house. She is a single mum, and she wanted to move to an area where there was a really good community for her son, that he could make friends, also that it was in the catchment area to his school. And the area that she wanted to be in is a notoriously expensive area of Leeds. It's absolutely beautiful. There's, a real sort of community feel. There's countryside on the doorstep, but it's definitely at the upper end of the affordability scale. not just for her, but for quite a lot of people. So it's often an area that people will overlook and kind of discount because the houses are so much more expensive than some of the other areas that you could move to. But this was the area that she needed to move to for the catchment area for the schools. And she'd looked at some houses and she put in an offer on one of the houses that she really liked, and it fell through. It didn't go her way. They gave the house to somebody else, another family. And so then when she finally moved to the home that she's in now a few months ago, it was in the area that she wanted. It was the house that she wanted in terms of how the kind of the the style and the flow, and it's just a really gorgeous open space with tons of, I guess, kind of like entertaining space. Like, it's a really great house for having people over, and a really nice, kitchen, family area, etc. But the one thing that was missing was that the kind of not necessarily the community feel, but the space for her son to play and make friends. However, there was a cul-de-sac just over the road, and it so transpired that when she started at a new running club, that she made friends with one of the guys. It might have even been the guy running the club, actually. In chatting and talking about her situation and having a son and where she'd moved to, this guy turned around and said to her, "Oh, I know loads of the families that live in that cul-de-sac over the road. Let me introduce you, and I'm sure that your son can make friends with the kids that play there." So that was amazing, because it just meant that the one thing that was missing off her kind of tick list, if you so to speak, was on there all along. It just needed the necessary introductions. And then the other thing that happened to her was she was talking to somebody in her team at work the other day, and they'd moved house last August when she was looking at houses to move to as well. And they said to her, they got chatting about where they'd moved to, and they said, "Oh yeah, I've moved to so-and-so road or so-and-so street." And it transpired that it was like 2 houses down from where my friend had been looking, which she would not have wanted to live next door, but one to somebody that reported into her at work. Like, they're a close team, but I think that having that kind of like differentiation and that line between work and home is really important to her. It's just a little bit too close for comfort. So it was that kind of like moment in knowing why that hadn't worked out, because the person that she'd spoken to had already started the process of moving into that home and securing that home when she went to look at houses. So it's just funny how these things work out. And that was a case of her really trusting the process and really looking back in hindsight and understanding why things hadn't worked out. And it just gives you more evidence that plays into your, I guess, just your future ability to really trust and really surrender. And then another of my friends has recently had a relationship breakdown in quite a traumatic way, and it really came out of the blue. She was actually due to get married this year, so it was a really, really, really difficult time. And being in her mid to late 30s, she has decided to go through the process of freezing her eggs, because she knows in the future that she'd like to be a mother. And it's just, the sensible thing to do if you have the financial resources to do that. So that's what she's done. And it was really funny because we were talking about it the other day, and the BBC's actually picked up on this egg freezing journey, made it into a documentary, alongside some really well-known famous faces that have also gone through the same process. And the reason that they've picked up on hers is because she works in the fertility space. So that is something that is obviously a very personal journey, but also really relevant to her professional, sort of relating professionally to the people that she works with. And we were saying the other day, isn't it funny how this is probably going to massively elevate her career and her exposure within the fertility space? And at the time, everything that happened to her at the end of last year was just the most horrendous, traumatic, bolt out the blue experience. But actually what has happened as a result of that is something that is going to be so beneficial and so relevant to her career, that there are really, really good things that have come out of a really, really shitty process and a really shitty situation. So we've talked about what trust in the process means and some examples of looking back in hindsight, connecting the dots, understanding why things have happened. But the only way that we can really do this is to have some actionable steps as to how. And if you're sat there thinking, it's all very well telling me to surrender, telling me to trust, but right now I am just in a world of anxiety and worry and trying to control the situation, trying to control the outcome, I don't feel capable of being able to surrender and to trust. How on earth do I do this? And so I'm going to talk through 5 steps. There's probably a ton more things that you can do, but these 5 steps are the things that I turn to when I'm in a situation where I feel like I'm trying to control the outcome, or where it just feels like I need to let go a little bit. I need to have some mental space and basically need to practice patience, because this is what this all the whole process is, right? It's a lesson in practicing patience. So the first step is to do a brain dump. That could be a brain dump of how you're feeling. It could be a brain dump of all the possible scenarios. I actually went on a training course a couple of years ago where one of the mindset trainers, and it was like a leadership course, was talking about how to look at things from the negative. Now, bear with me on this because it sounds so counterintuitive and counterproductive, but actually sometimes people are more negatively inclined. I think as humans, generally we're programmed to see the negatives. It's a survival instinct. But actually, sometimes that is quite a useful way to look at things, because it puts things into perspective and it frames things. So for me, I'll brain dump all of the feelings that I've got, whether that is anxious, whether that is a sense of not being good enough, whether it is just a real kind of out of control feeling and wanting to have control back. I'll put everything onto a piece of paper, which in itself is quite cathartic. It enables you to just feel like a little bit of a sigh of relief of just getting it off your chest. So a brain dump of your feelings, but then also I will brain dump the worst case scenario. So for instance, let's use the house as a situation or a scenario. If we had put the offer in on the house and I was feeling super unable to surrender, super controlling, I would brain dump all of the possible scenarios if we didn't get the house. So the worst case scenarios. So the worst case scenario is, in that instance, we don't get the house. And what would that mean to us? Well, we were in a situation where I'd got a flat that I was selling, and we were living in a rented flat that my partner was renting in Leeds. So my house was back in Birmingham, my flat, and then he was living in Leeds. And because it was COVID, I'd been quarantining with him. So the worst case scenario was that our situation wouldn't change. Now, yes, I'd got a buyer for my house, but it wasn't somebody that wouldn't wait. She was a landlord, so she wasn't looking to move in herself. So the worst case scenario was that actually our situation would just remain the same. Yes, we were experiencing a really horrible neighbourhood in Leeds, and there was a lot of stuff going on that we wanted to get away from, but to wait another 3 to 6 months, it wasn't going to, no one was going to die. So that really was the worst case scenario. And then the feelings and the thoughts were things like, we're never going to find our dream home, or never going to find a home to move to, or we're going to have to compromise and move into a horrible neighbourhood. And these things just never happened. Like, the worst case scenario really was the worst case scenario. So dumping down everything that could happen is a really good way of just putting things into perspective. And that for me is a really good first step, just to get like real clarity over the situation. And you'll normally find that all of these scenarios that you're running away with in your mind never happen, but just logically putting down what could happen and, the worst case, it'll just allow you to look at things and be like, okay, well, if that happened, what would I do? And if, like me, you're quite pragmatic and quite a logical person, that will really help to just iron everything out in your mind, essentially. So that's the first step. Now, the second step is all about focusing on what you can control. And there's a quote that I've read, no idea where this quote's from, I don't even know where I found it, but it says, if it's out of your hands, it deserves freedom from your mind too. If it's out of your hands, it deserves freedom from your mind too. So that is basically just saying that things that we can't control don't deserve a place in our worry or in our mind. If there's something that you truly have no control over, so again, in the house scenario, you've got all your documents together, you are working with an amazing mortgage broker. I will link Becky's details below because she's the absolute best. But if you're working with somebody who is a professional and you've given them all the information you possibly can, and then you have put in for a mortgage, you have zero control over the outcome of that now. Once you've actioned what you can, you've got absolutely fuck all control over whether or not you get that mortgage. And as long as you've done the first step and looked at what is the worst case scenario, you will be able to relinquish the anxiety and the need to control a lot easier, because if the worst case scenario is your situation stays as it is, then really you're no worse off. If it is you need to be out of your rented house and find somewhere else to rent, or maybe put your stuff into storage, or maybe go and live with some family, then you've got a plan. So the worst case in that scenario is you don't get the mortgage. You maybe have to go through another few months of finding another provider to offer you a mortgage, and you have to find alternative accommodation. But again, nobody has died, and nobody is, there's actually not a situation there where it should be, a real anxiety and a real worry. So focus on what you can control. If you can work with an amazing mortgage advisor, if you can get together all your documentation, make sure that you are, you've paid off credit card debt, make sure that your partner has been honest with you about their financial situation. If your ducks are in a row, control the controllables and then relinquish that control over to the surrender the rest of it over to the universe, the powers that be, whatever you may think. But actually stressing over things that you can't control, if you cannot have control over something, it doesn't deserve a place in your mind or for you to worry about it. Then thirdly, I will focus on looking at my growth mindset. So the ability to change and to improve and to constantly grow is probably, for me, the most amazing thing about being human and having this human experience. So the ability to know that you don't have to stay as you are, and that actually you can do something about your situation. You can do something about your knowledge. You can learn, you can grow, you can change, and you can adapt. And the most powerful word that you can use when thinking about your growth mindset is the word yet. Learning about this concept changed my life because it means that I am so much more committed to the process, so much more patient, so much more trusting, because as long as I'm taking steps to control what I can control, I might not be able to do something yet, but it means that I feel like I've got an element of control over being able to do that thing or learn that thing or have that thing. It's that age-old adage of, taking care of the pennies and the pennies will take care of the pounds, i.e., don't focus on the end result. Don't focus on needing 30 grand for a house deposit, or don't focus on needing to lose 2 stone. Focus on losing £1 a week. Focus on saving 500 quid a month. Whatever the end result is, break down those goals and know that the progression is the result. That if you keep progressing and keep putting the pennies into the jar, you keep showing up at the gym, you keep tracking your calories, whatever that process is, keep with it and be consistent, and make sure that you use the word yet when you're talking about the result. So I cannot speak Spanish yet is a far more powerful phrase and will keep you committed to the process of learning Spanish than just saying, I'm not fluent in Spanish. Or I don't have 30 grand for a house deposit yet. Will keep you committed to the results way more than, and the process, way more than saying, I've not got 30 grand for a house deposit. Because you could have 5 or 10 grand saved, but saying you've not got 30 grand or not got the house deposit makes you feel like you're just not there and that you're a failure. But saying I've not got it yet implies that there's an element of action and an element of growth involved in your current situation and the process that you're going through. And that is such a freaking powerful thing. For me, saying yeah means that I will stay committed. I will keep the faith and keep the positivity. And even if it goes wrong, even if you don't get the house, or even if your savings goals maybe go off piste a little, or there's something that throws up a curveball, you stay committed, because the word yet is probably one of the most powerful that I've learned. And that is such a powerful phrase. So that's number 3. Number 4 is tracking your progress, which again plays into that step of, continual progress, but tracking it and celebrating the small wins. So this week, I actually did a LinkedIn post about this earlier in the week, but I went to the gym. I was doing an exercise and it was actually a personal best on that exercise, but I still felt like I hadn't progressed that much. I felt like whilst it was a personal best, that actually I hadn't increased the weight that much since the start. Now I've got an app that I track my progress in, that I share with my coach. He has access to, and then each session that I do, I'll track my results in, because I'm training. I'm not just exercising. I'm actually training to change my body, change my strength, change my mindset, change my my mental ability to stick to something. So tracking the progress is super important. And I actually looked back on what I'd done, what I'd lifted on that first exercise 6 weeks ago, and it was so much more progress than I thought it was, which not only just gave me a little bit of a boost, but it actually just reminded me, if you don't track your progress, if you don't track what you're doing, then, and I'm not talking about, it might work for you, but it certainly wouldn't work for me to track every single area of my life. But even things like tracking my calories, the fact that I can look back and see that I've hit my calories every single day so far this year that I've been tracking, and my protein, is a massive, it's a massive kind of motivator and boost for me. So I think just tracking your progress, tracking your results, and like I say, celebrating those small wins, celebrating that growth, looking at the end of the month, what did I save this month for that deposit? Or how much weight have I actually lost since I've started this journey? Because looking at where you've got to go can sometimes make you feel like giving up. It can sometimes make you feel like this is not worth it, this is not working. But actually, if you look at how far you've come, you'll often be quite surprised at the results and just how much you have progressed and developed. So absolutely track your progress and absolutely celebrate your growth. And again, for me, this is a real-time lesson that with my business this year, I might not have been generating the revenue that I was this time last year, but actually I've got more clients on board that I am actively either working with at the moment or are going to be shortly working with. I've changed up my CRM system, migrated all the data and got that up and running. I've integrated automation into my business. I have understood my taxes and my P&L, and now I'm going into this year with a much clearer mindset on how to manage my finances. There's so much that I've achieved that isn't shown in the revenue results, but actually I've come so far and I've progressed so much in so many areas of business that It's just that little bit of progression, and it will be that snowball effect, that you never quite know when things are going to tip over that scale, or when they are going to, suddenly, going to make you take note and be like, oh shit, yeah, actually, that has come a lot longer and a lot further than I thought it had. So tracking your progress is number 4. The 5th one for me is taking the lessons. As I said at the start of this episode, every situation is either going to be a success, so it's going to turn out how you wanted it to, or it's going to be a life lesson. If every single situation was just a success, we would have absolutely no clarity or no insight into what works for us and what doesn't. So, for me with the gym, for instance, if every single session that I did was a success, I would have no idea what fueled my body properly, what amount of sleep I needed, how much I needed to be hydrated, because those sessions where I've struggled, I've been able to reflect on and be like, oh shit, yeah, I actually didn't drink enough water, or I didn't have any carbs before I trained, or actually I was training at a completely different time of day and that just doesn't work for me. So you need to be able to look at the lessons and look at the things that don't work, and really take the insights from that, and take, that lesson and really understand it, utilize it the next time that you're in a similar situation. So again, for me, this has played out recently in business. I went into business with somebody who was not necessarily in my inner circle, but they were known to me. I gave them a discount on the fees that I would normally charge, and we verbally went through a process of agreeing the terms. And then they met with one of my candidates, wanted to put them through to the second stage. We'd organised the second stage interview, and they turned around and said to me, actually, we can't afford to pay you what we've agreed. Now, to me, that was super unethical, because I felt like I was over a barrel. It was not, I wasn't going to withdraw the candidate from that process because they weren't working and they really wanted to work for this business. I knew they really wanted to do the job. So ethically, and actually my business is called Ethical Talent. So, I just couldn't do that. But it meant that I was over a barrel, because I either had to reduce my fee or I had to withdraw the candidate, which I wasn't prepared to do. And that was a massive lesson for me in just because you might know somebody or might have a closer relationship with them, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't go through proper business processes. And actually, you have to draw that line between personal and business is business. Getting a complete signature and a real tie-in to those fees and ways of working is just respecting my professionalism and my boundaries. And that shouldn't be something that I'm willing to bend or negotiate on, regardless of the situation. So it was a bit shit. The candidate did get the job. He is super happy. I would never have taken that away from him. But equally, it was a huge lesson to me to, really make sure that in future, all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted before we go down that process. It was a shit lesson. It resulted in a lot less revenue into the business than I should have got. But, these things happen, and I'm glad that it happened, because it was with a client where the fee was a lot smaller, rather than with a really big client where, the results could have had a really, really detrimental impact on the future of my business, just being really honest. So taking the lessons is something that I think is really, really important. It's probably the most important thing of this whole topic. And actually for me, a massive lesson in trusting my gut came when I took a job a few years ago that I knew deep down wasn't really in alignment with me. And 9 months into it, we were agreeing my exit from the business because things just didn't play out as, I'd been sold and promised. At the time, that felt shitty. At the time, that felt really, really tough. But actually, it meant that I had the freedom to work between both Leeds and Birmingham, and actually take a role up in Leeds where my then partner, now husband, was living, which meant that I could spend more time with him. It meant that I moved to a business that was flexible, and essentially it laid the cosmic breadcrumbs for where I am now. So trusting that process again was really tough, but the lesson in that was I should have trusted my gut in the first instance. But actually, when you look back, it's always led to where you are now. So if you'd have changed one thing in that path or in that sort of journey, you wouldn't be where you are now. So those are my 5 tips. I think there's definitely an element of consistency that's required with this. There's actions that you need to take. There are questions that you need to ask yourself, like, do you value where you want to be long term versus what is comfortable in the present? Do you show up and do the work regularly, or do you just sit where you are now in comfort? And there's a whole other episode in that kind of comfort piece, but I think asking yourself that question and then showing up consistently will ensure that you are doing what you can for the situation to play out how you want it to. But in essence, you do just have to have that trust. And also, I think being vulnerable with other people, talking about how things are making you feel, talking about your struggles, you'll often find that other people have been in a situation that mirrors your own and can relate to you. Speak to people, have that support system. Come to me if you don't feel like you've got that support system in your immediate circle. But I think, if you follow these steps of the how and then create that space to be patient and to trust, honestly, magic happens. It really, really does. And even just recording this today has reminded me of, why I need to do all of this and why I do need to trust that process, whether it's in business or in my personal life, or whether it's with situations with friends or loved ones. Things honestly do always work out in the end. So I hope that that's been super useful, that you've managed to been able to take something from it. Yeah, even if there's just a couple of things in there that you resonate with, then I'm really glad. So I will come back into your ears next Sunday. Like I say, I think that is going to be a spring equinox episode all around visioning and setting yourself up for the new season and all around our energies, because honestly, the stuff that I've learned recently about the cycles and the seasons and our energies, this is shit that we should get taught at school. It really is. So have a fantastic week all, and I will see you all again next Sunday. Thanks for listening. You can find us on Instagram at HelloSundayPod, or you can email us on hellosundaypod@outlook.com. Have a great week.